This meeting of the Barnstable Infrastructure and Energy Committee is being recorded and will be posted for future viewing on the Town of Barnstable website. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, anyone else desiring to make such a recording or transmission must notify the chair. And with that, Barry, you can get started.
Great, we'll get started again. So the minutes, I looked over the minutes, they looked fine to me. Does anyone have any suggested edits, or do we have a motion to approve?
I move to accept the minutes.
And second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, looks like unanimous. All right, so their minutes are approved. Old business, green community. So let me go back to where we were last meeting, and we talked about the Department of Energy Resources proposing to amend the regulations pertaining to the current version of the stretch code and the specialized opt-in code. And they were posted on the website, the DOR's website, shortly before our last meeting. So we talked about that, had a little presentation and addressed that. And they provide an opportunity for the town of Barnstable to submit written comments, or anybody else for that matter, by September 17th. There's also a virtual, what they call listening session, I believe, which they've now scheduled for the day before that, next Monday, the 16th. And at the meeting, we had talked about, and I think Councilor Turkelson suggested that I get in touch with the town attorney regarding the process by which either we as a committee or the town could submit comments. I did that, and it was suggested that I draft comments, circulate them to the town manager, Mark Ells, and Brian Florence, the building inspector, and set up a meeting, which is now scheduled for this Thursday morning with them to go over the comments. So I drafted comments, I circulated it to all of you, and we can talk about them. My plan is after this meeting to make any changes to those comments based on your input, and to circulate them to Mark Ells and Brian Florence, and we'll talk about it Thursday. So that's the process. I would assume they would be submitted by the town if they're deemed to be acceptable, or whatever form they're finally approved. So with that, let me go over the comments that I drafted and give you a little bit of the rationale for why I drafted them the way I did. So first of all, this is an unusual opportunity. The way it works, you either adopt the stretch code as it is, or you don't. There really isn't an opportunity to suggest changes to it. So this provides us a pretty unique opportunity, I think. The comments as drafted deal with what they propose, which is revisions to the code that were suggested after getting more input earlier this year. They track to a good extent comments made by the Mass Home Builders Association, and apparently input from building inspectors and whatnot. So what the comments that I drafted relate to those changes, but also address some other issues that may or may not, probably not, in the scope of these changes, but gives the opportunity to raise some issues with DOER. And let me, with that as an overview, say that the comments are generally supportive of the changes. And the comments really talk about in a very factual way that that our committee has reviewed this, and this is really, these comments are coming from the result of the committee and the professional staff of the town getting together, but ultimately it's up to the town council whether they adopt the stretch code. We had, at the meeting we had with Brian Florence, he had offered to get us in touch with a builder with a lot of experience with the building codes. And after the meeting, we didn't hear from him. We asked him for that, and he did provide contact information for Guy Webb, who has a lot of experience, but he was a consultant for the Mass Home Builders Association that drafted the comments that DOER was responding to, among others. And generally speaking, they were. He said that his organization was pleased with the changes to the stretch code. They generally provide the more lenient rules for home remodels, and the trigger to the being subject to the stretch code and the HERS ratings is made more lenient primarily by not calculating the square footage of a finished basement. Now, ironically, I did exactly the type of home remodel project that was subject to a lot of questions and uncertainty. And in fact, even after looking at the changes to the language, which would exclude the square footage of a home remodel and the trigger, it wasn't totally clear to me. Now, I will say I did talk to Guy Webb, who is the person that Brian Florence referred me to. He thinks it's pretty clear. Maybe because he's an expert in the field, I'm not. But I did draft some language there to raise the issue and to say if DOR thinks it needs clarification, they ought to do it. There was another issue that I raised here about, and this was something that was, I think Brian Florence raised 3 years ago when the town council considered this going forward with the stretch code, or at least considering. And this has to do with the ability of a building inspector to give temporary occupancy if basically I think the example was used was the final inspection by a HERS rater, or basically it's the performance test and it needs to match up with what the standard is. And if it was based on, say, like a washer dryer not being purchased, which was and in place, which was an issue during COVID because of supply chain issues, whether the building inspector could grant temporary occupancy subject to it being finalized when everything is right and the appliances arrive and whatnot. And Mr. Webb did not believe that town inspectors have the inherent authority to do that, and he didn't think that needed to be raised. But I wanted to discuss that with Mr. Florence and Mr. Ells as to whether they want to raise it, because if that is a issue of uncertainty, then it can be addressed. And it was in the context where regarding another standard of passive home compliance, where apparently there is a timing issue between doing the tests and getting final confirmation that there was a word change here that allows for temporary occupancy till everything's finalized. Finally, the Home Builders Association came up with their own cost study, and they I don't know whether they directly challenged, but they came up with a different result than DOER did in terms of whether stretch code would essentially require higher costs than, particularly with regard to an all-electric house, than just with the base code. And although their analysis did not consider the $15,000 rebate or the $2,000 tax credit, which to me seemed to be an omission, which in one case made up all the difference, in the other case made up most of the difference. But and Mr. Webb said, well, one of the issues was that there may be incremental costs as a result of doing what's necessary to comply with the rebates. So in any event, and DOER says they're looking at doing an updated cost benefit analysis in any event. So this is a suggestion to take a number of steps to update the analysis with some specificity. And one of the things, again, that came up 3 years ago is the cost of a HERS rater, and maybe in the neighborhood of $2,000, $2,200, and that is a cost that was not considered in this cost analysis. So I've included all that. The last thing is there is no analysis, and based on my conversation with DOER, there's not a plan to do it regarding the additional cost of the stretch code vis-a-vis the base code for home remodel projects that are triggered by the stretch code. And I don't think there's a plan to do that, but and the reason is that it's very hard to come up with your standard home remodel projects, I think, for obvious reasons, but at the end suggests that despite those difficulties, maybe some examples could be put together with some analysis. So in this way, I think there would be better information that would be available to the town council as to what is the additional cost, if any, from adopting the stretch code. Generally, if for smaller houses that use ductless systems, if there are any additional costs, I think they're probably overcome by the rebates and the tax credits from what I've seen. But in any event, that's the purpose, and I'm trying to put this together in a way that whether you're for or against adopting the stretch code, these are comments that you could support. So that's kind of that's a summary and arrangement for it. I do have some relatively minor edits that are not substantive things that I've caught, but with that, I'll just throw it up open for discussion.
I guess one thing I'd just like to say in response to, I think you've done some great work here, Barry, and I think what's very good about this is that it really is responsive to the concerns that were raised by Brian Florence when we met with him. And so I think it's great to be able to address some of his concerns, and hopefully that will make the town more comfortable moving forward with this.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also it was intended to address Councilor Trickleson's suggestion that that we provide as much of the facts as we can. And maybe this could be presented at a workshop. I think Jane, I look from the minutes and I guess memory as well, suggested that maybe the once the regulations are adopted, we could then go forward with the workshop rather than proceeding with that. So we get more finality to this. But I think there's a pretty high likelihood these changes with probably relatively small revisions are going to end up being adopted. And I suspect that'll be either later this year or maybe early next year. And just the process it takes to adopt regulations.
And I have some hesitancy in delaying, but I think probably it is the better course to have to propose that the town adopt the stretch code after those changes have actually been made. Otherwise, it's, I think there was concern last time around. There was some concern about the idea of a moving target, and so probably better to wait until the target is fixed.
Yeah, one thing that was raised at the last, and didn't feel a need to address it in these comments. I think was once you adopt the stretch code, and it is, they're both the base code and stretch code change every 3 years. But once you've adopted it, you essentially you can't get out of it, and we've learned that is not true. Apparently, one town has gone from the stretch code back to the base code, but that wasn't necessary to address here.
Yeah, and I guess you would probably then lose your green community status.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay. Well, that's great. So it really is. The town isn't signing up for something that could change.
Well, I mean, it's signing up. Whether you're in the base code or the stretch code, there are going to be changes because changes every years. But you can opt out of the stretch code if you want to, and with your point that you'll lose your green communities designation.
Hey, Barry, it's Rob.
Hey, Rob. Yeah.
I was amazed. Well, it just prompted me to ask the question of myself that appliances were part of the stretch code implementation, I guess. But as a side note, it's like, you buy when you go to buy, your dryer or whatever, your once every 20-year purchase, they have the sticker about how efficient it is, and it's like, I don't know, I've never seen anything even remotely close to the lower end of the efficiency bar. So,
yeah, let me clarify. It could be, but it doesn't have to be part of the HERS rating. So if your HERS rating is dependent on having appliances of a certain efficiency, then then you have to show, yeah, I bought these appliances, I've installed them. But it doesn't have to be, and probably I imagine it would have a fairly small impact. So that example could apply, but I would imagine most likely it would not.
yeah, it was just a side comment or side thought of mine is like, how do I even go get something that's the bottom end of the efficiency rating? I mean, I'm not going to go to Lowe's, that's for sure, because I've never seen anything in there close.
Well, I have the misfortune of having purchased a washer and a dryer over the last couple of years, not because I wanted to, because the ones I had failed. But Yeah, there is some choice. There is some variance. Yeah, and you know, cost is a factor as well.
So do we, you want a motion to approve this to send to the council? Is that what's?
I don't know whether we need a motion to approve it, but I can say let me ask you this, is it a fair statement to say that the committee supports it with, I'll make a few
Yeah.
minor edits that won't change the meaning here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then I want to, William, you asked a question, and frankly, I didn't really have time to run it down that much, but I'll tell you what I do know about the difference between the base code and the stretch code in terms of air quality and ventilation.
Mm-hmm.
So I was told uh, the answer is no or not much, but I haven't, you know, there are a lot of there are some differentiators, but apparently that's not one of it. But you know, that's something I'll put on my to-do list.
Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. So with that, is anything else? You know, and I'll report back after the meeting that we have on Thursday. So. All right. Any with that, do you want to move on to food waste?
Sure. So I think now that we're into September, we should reach out again to Tom. I'm losing the name.
Tom
The
McKean.
McKean, yes.
Yep.
Tom McKean. And ask him to meet with us so that we can discuss commercial food waste. I think maybe this time we copy Brian on the email to Tom, just to make it easier to follow up if necessary.
Sure.
Yeah. So that was one action item. The other issue is, I'm guessing, Kelly, that we're not going to have our communication plan completed in the next couple of weeks. I certainly don't want to, I think that's fine. But if that's the case, what I wanted to suggest is that maybe over the course of September and October, we could work just on the question of signage. I think that's kind of one of the easier areas where a small effort could make a significant difference. And so I wanted to suggest maybe we just try to move forward with that piece of it, and some of these other more ambitious projects maybe wait until the winter or whenever we have the staff available.
Yeah, on that note, that's an easy one. I'm actually, I think we've talked about this. My due date is the date of the next meeting, the 23rd, which I don't know if we'll see if I make it that far or not. But one thing I can share with you all is we're actually this week interviewing for a communications assistant, which part of it was kind of streamlined, knowing that I was going to be heading out of the office. But the other part is just the fact that when I interviewed 2 years ago, they talked about wanting to build out a team for me, because at some point we're going to have 5 sewer projects going on at once. And how does one person communicate that?
Yeah.
But also the fact that my role in this communications assistant will be DPW wide. So they'll be able to support on other projects throughout the department. So we had our first 2 interviews today, and I'm pretty confident that I'll at least make it through the rest of this week and be able to get through all the interviews. So we will potentially have someone here in the next couple of weeks who can pick up where I leave off. That person may shadow Michelle also, just as a side note, to support this committee as well. Although we definitely want someone who, has the experience and is, capable of taking meeting minutes. So I don't think we're just going to throw a new person over here to support the committee. But with that said, I think having that person sit in with Michelle and observe, they can start helping push some of those items through as well.
Mhm.
The signage is easy. I can talk with Tracy about that. We have a managers meeting tomorrow anyway, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I'll just reiterate that that was something that we want to get done sooner rather than later. And I can at least start those conversations, and then
Mhm.
we can work with him directly on that. But yeah, I wanted to kind of keep you guys all in the loop that we are looking to hire someone to support me and DPW. So there will be someone who can help kind of push some of the communications plan along while I am out.
That's great. Great.
Thanks.
Well, that's all,
Um,
that's really all I have at the moment on food waste.
Okay, well, thank you, John. Chris, do you want to, you're up next for climate change and climate science.
Yeah. Hey Kelly, could I share? I just wanted to show how this stuff, since meteorological summer's over, figured I'd just show how we did and how we stacked up.
Oh,
Yep, there we go.
When does, what's the period of meteorological summer?
Meteorological summer runs from June 1st to the end of August.
Okay.
So it is the warmest 3 months statistically in a year. So instead of using the astronomical seasons, it's driven by our atmospheric norms. So I was a little shocked it wasn't a little bit warmer, but the overnight lows ranked. So Hyannis Airport has a data set that goes back to 1998, which we're starting to be in that period where it's long enough for decent climatological records to show trends. It's not just, a couple of off seasons. So that trend is significant enough that we can kind of pull data and apply it to some of our climate projections. But when it comes to overnight lows, since 1998, it ranked as the 8th warmest with an average overnight low of 62.7. So in the top 10, and if you look at the average, which is the average of the overnight low and the daytime high, similar ranking. So let me update this and drop it down. 2024, let's see here. It was a top 18. So it's the average temperature was 70 degrees. But if you look at the top 5, the majority have happened since the mid 2000s. So definitely seeing a pretty significant warming trend mid Cape. So now, I mean, I'm happy that we actually have this decent of a data set in Hyannis, and now we're starting to really be able to see trends locally, as opposed to using Blue Hill, as opposed to using Boston and Providence. It really is nice to have this data set on the Cape. Yeah, Barry.
Chris, do you have a data set for water temperature here?
We don't. The climatological records for the oceanographic side of weather are still limited. We can give wave height and direction, but water temperature still is not a real accurate data set, unfortunately.
Oh, and I think it was last year, and maybe it may have been early May. So I had a friend who wanted to go swimming with me, I think in Whiteville Beach. And I said, early May. Okay, let me check some data on water temperature. So I checked, I forget exactly what it was, but it was cold enough. I said, do you have a wetsuit? I have a wetsuit. It's a little cold for me. So I said, we both got wetsuits. And when we went there, it really, we saw a couple who were even older than we were, who were swimming without a bathing suit. And we were able to find some data. It was actually something like 5 degrees warmer than some historical temperature. So we felt a little bit foolish with the wetsuits, but I was just curious whether, water temperature obviously has a big environmental effect
Right.
on fish and flora and whatnot. Yeah, so I was curious if you could maybe see what you could find out about that.
Yeah, I mean the next meeting I can look up buoy 44020, which is in Nantucket Sound. Right now, I mean the current temperature is 71 degrees, which is quite warm
Yeah.
for mid sound. So for that'll be my update for the next meeting. I can look at more
Okay.
the crunch those numbers and see.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, I think the last 2 years relative to my sense of it, the few years before that have not been as warm. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. But we'll probably hold on to, I mean, the pattern is pretty good for a very warm fall, both air temperature, but also holding on to warm ocean water temperatures too.
Okay.
So
All right. Well, good.
enjoy swimming well into October, I think.
I went swimming yesterday. It was nice.
It was.
Okay.
So
Well,
that's all I have.
okay. All right. Well, thank you, Chris. All right. So now new business. Thank you for updates from me. So just wanted to go over sort of 3 sets of events that have happened with regard to the offshore wind projects that affect our town, primarily with respect to the Park City Wind, or the New England Wind 1 project, and Commonwealth Wind, now it's known as New England Wind 2. So the the first thing is DOER announced what is it? I believe last Friday, the projects that were selected in the most recent offshore wind procurement. And Massachusetts selected 3 projects, a total of about 2,700 megawatts. Rhode Island selected 1 project, or part of 1 project, for 200 megawatts. Connecticut did not select any, but they said they're still looking at it. So, and they may make a selection at some point in time. That's uncertain. So, looking at the specific projects, the Park City Wind project was selected by Massachusetts. That project was contracted to Connecticut before, but the contract was terminated for the reasons that we talked about great inflation and supply chain issues and having to do with the war in Ukraine and other matters. So contract, or excuse me, they were selected over the next 2 months or 3 months. They will negotiate a contract with the utilities, and at that time, or when they file it with the DPU, the Department of Public Utilities, by the end of the year, then the price and the terms and conditions, or at least those that aren't confidential, will be made public. That's standard practice in these procurements. The other projects, Vineyard Wind 2 was a 1,200 megawatt project, and Massachusetts selected 800 megawatts of that. The other 400 megawatts were not selected by anyone at this point. That project would make landfall in Connecticut. The third project was the South Coast Wind and 1,100 megawatts would go to Massachusetts, and 200 megawatts are going to the island. And that makes landfall at the breaking point in Somerset. So what I wanted to do is to give an overview of all the projects thus far that have contracts and how it pertains to a study that was conducted by the independent system operator of New England, or ISO New England, back in 2019. And you know, as someone as an industry professional in this area, this all makes a lot of sense to me. So I thought I would convey some of this information to you, and so the world makes a little more sense. So ISO New England did this study basically at a very high level. They said, what for offshore wind projects in New England, the existing leased areas off Massachusetts and Rhode Island, what are the places and the amount of megawatts that interconnections could be made without really major transmission upgrades? So they concluded there's about 5,800 megawatts in 4 basic locations. And in Cape Cod, of that 5,800, that's 2,400 megawatts. Later, when they did more detailed studies pertaining to other projects, and you know what's called the cluster study, that number has been increased to 2,800 megawatts. So that correlates to Vineyard Wind 1, which is 800 megawatts coming in at Cobbles Beach. Park City Wind or New England Wind 1 coming in at Craigsville Beach, also approximately 800 megawatts. And the 1,200 megawatts of New England Wind 2 proposed to come in at Dowses Beach. And I guess importantly, New England Wind 2 bid but did not obtain anything. The other areas are Brayton Point. The ISOs looked at about 1,600 megawatts of interconnection capability. And I would have to say, with an asterisk, because there's a rule in ISO New England that you're maxed out at an interconnection of around 1,200, 1,300 megawatts for reliability purposes. And so that sort of correlates to the South Coast Wind project that is going to interconnect there around by the old Brayton Point coal-fired station. The 2 other locations is one in Rhode Island, I think it's Davis County, that the ISO looked at 1,000 megawatts of interconnection capacity, and the Revolution Wind project, which has already been contracted. It looks like it's going forward to Connecticut and Rhode Island, about 700 megawatts is going there. And lastly, the Vineyard Wind 2 project, the ISO New England looked at that location in Montville, Connecticut, as having about 800 megawatts of interconnection capacity without real major upgrades. And that's the amount of the contract, although the proposal was for 1,200 megawatts. So when you get beyond that, if you're to interconnecting to Cape Cod, you would need a new major transmission line on its own right of way to connect up to near Boston, or to essentially have an offshore transmission line connect, generally in the Boston area. It would be Boston, Everett, a couple of other locations. But it seems unlikely that beyond these existing projects that you would have future projects that would interconnect at Cape Cod. And beyond that, you're looking at major projects with high voltage direct current connections as opposed to alternating current, which has a variety of implications for costs and economies. But what's actually happened so far, these procurements tracks ISO New England's view of what the interconnection capacity is without major transmission additions fairly closely. So let me stop there and see if anyone has any comments or thoughts on that.
I guess one question would be, what are the prospects for upgrading any of the transmission capabilities? Reconductoring is one term I've heard in that regard. Is that going to become necessary at some point in order to keep building more wind projects?
Yeah, so the reconductoring is often part of these interconnections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when you get into building new rights of way,
mm-hmm.
and what is a relatively, which is a congestion, and that can be very difficult. The ones that so far have been generally been using existing rights of way. So, but anyways, they're looking at the lease locations that are to the east, off the Atlantic coast of Cape Cod, and the transmission grid. Once you get past actually Barnstable, it's because there's less and less load, it's pretty weak. Mm-hmm. So I just don't see that in the future, beyond the projects that exist, that there would be additional projects interconnecting to Cape Cod. That's for
that's about
so I think you end up being maxed out. And there was a cluster study that ISO New England did a few years ago for additional projects, and I believe there were not sufficient proposals to go forward with that. So anyway, I just thought that's, to me, that's useful information if you're trying to get a sense of offshore wind projects here and the potential future.
Yeah.
So
how much of Massachusetts consumption would this represent if all these get completed?
Yeah, I can.
Maybe that's too big a question. Yeah. No, that's
so.
But it's I can say it's important for the state's decarbonization plan. The offshore wind is I think it's the biggest component, and the reason, there are a lot of reasons for that. It's very difficult to do. It's sort of a mammoth undertaking, but we have limited land for onshore wind, limitations for solar as well. I don't think it's in our future, immediate future, to build a new nuclear plant. So there are limited.
Barry, there is energy being produced that isn't earmarked for any state right now. I mean, is that accurate, what you said, or what I might take what you said?
So this was let's see if I understand your question. I'll give you my take on it. I may not be understanding the question correctly, but there were Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut that all have passed legislation with carbon reduction goals. Massachusetts, they're legally binding, and for procurements, some are specific for wind and some more general. So Massachusetts and Rhode Island made selections. Connecticut did not, and what they've said is we may take further action later. And so it's not clear whether that means they're still looking at it and they may make a decision. Some people have speculated that the Vineyard Wind 2 project, the 400 megawatts, might go to Connecticut. Or they may have decided just to take a pass this round.
Okay, I thought you said one of the things that you mentioned was one of the wind projects could create this many megawatts, but Massachusetts was only taking,
Right. So the New England 2 project, it was a 1,200 megawatt proposal, of which Massachusetts is taking 800 megawatts. And
so there's,
there could be a variety of reasons for that.
okay.
And it could be that these are expensive projects and they just didn't want to do that, or maybe they thought Connecticut, the plan was they would take 400 because it is making landfall in Connecticut. And it's possible it may be based on the terms of the proposal. That's all confidential. We don't know that. And I don't know whether there are interconnection limits that when you go beyond 800 megawatt, that it may be problematic. So it's just, we don't know.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the second sort of series of things, there are a number of pieces of litigation that pertain to the town of Barnstable's approval of what effectively is a settlement agreement with Park City Wind, which involves there were basically the town of Barnstable, after approving easements, and it was approved by the legislature under Article 97, the town basically withheld giving the Park City Wind the easements. Park City Wind asked for them, and it resulted in the town going into executive session and voting to negotiate a further agreement with additional benefits to the town and some additional mitigation measures. And they approved that. And so there was a group of individuals that said by doing this, they, I think, violated the public meeting law. And then after the town responded that no, they didn't, the plaintiff dismissed the lawsuit. And the second one that was brought by Barnstable Speaks and Save Dawson Beach, their main assertion was this was a legislative function, and therefore the town couldn't approve it in the way that they did, and that potentially that raised the ability of citizens to I'm thinking referendum on it, but essentially this to overturn that in a vote. There is, I'm sorry, I just forgot the name. In any event, so the town responded that no, this was settlement of an agreement that's basically an executive function, and they're allowed to do that under state law and the city's charter. And there was a motion to enjoin the town from granting the easements, and the judge denied the motion for preliminary injunction. Said that one of the criteria is that whether the plaintiff is likely to succeed in the merits, and he said that basically they're not. Since then, the town has moved to dismiss, and and it will proceed. But I would say, and I used to do this for a living years ago. 30 years ago, I did this kind of litigation. My experience was that generally, if someone doesn't succeed in a motion for preliminary injunction because they're not likely to succeed in the merits, when it gets finally litigated, most often the plaintiff is not successful. So that's kind of that. And then apparently there was saying to the Attorney General another public meeting law claim, and I don't know where that's gone. I know the town was going to respond to that. So that's that's that. And then just last Thursday, there was a workshop held at the town council meeting in which the town attorney, Karen Nober, and Thomas LaRosa, who works with her, made a presentation really on the legal background regarding what the way these projects get permitted and the environmental review, and what rights does the town have in this process. And I thought the attorneys did really a very good job of explaining this in a fairly succinct manner. So there's a federal and state environmental process, and the focus was on the New England Wind 2 or Commonwealth Wind project. And there's both a state and federal review process, environmental review, as well as getting on the federal level decision, the record of decision. This is the Bureau of Energy Management. And then at the state level, at the Energy Facility Siting Board. And we're basically the state has authority through the Energy Facility Siting Board to approve the type of transmission projects that are associated with these wind projects. And that's where they have jurisdiction. The law has been in effect for about 50 years. It has been, evolved over time. But basically, they have provisions where the state can overrule local decisions, local decisions, where they would interfere with the project that the siting board approves. So and they went into some detail, which I won't go into about how they do that within the law. And the reason for that is that these are projects of state and regional interest, and the purpose for the law, which was passed back, the original was passed in the 1970s, was to really prevent locality from blocking a project that was deemed to be in the state's public interest and pass the environmental review that's done on the state level. So but there's a feature here that works differently than the general permitting process, and that's called Article 97, where you have land that's owned by a town that's dedicated to a public purpose. In this case, it's Dowses Beach, where the transmission cable would go underneath the beach and then underneath the roads. there was discussion about whether or not there's more Article 97 property as well, but that wasn't clear. But in any event, it doesn't necessarily matter ultimately because it's needed for Dowsett Beach. And so traditionally what's happened is that the towns, if they make a decision to grant an easement, it then goes to the legislature, and they can approve it by a 2/3 vote, and by both chambers. And there's a little bit more to that, but that's the basics of it. But if the town doesn't do that, either any legislator or the governor, on the basis of there being a state or regional basis, could bring the matter before the legislature. And if the legislature passes this by a 2/3 vote in each chamber, then the easement would be granted. Now, they were asked, do you know of any precedent where this has been done basically over the objection of a town? And they said, we don't know of any such precedent. So, so in a nutshell, the town would not have, the ability to block a project if the siting board approves it and decides that town zoning or decisions or actions are essentially precluding or getting in the way of a project. It's not granted automatically. That's a decision that's made. And then there's especially with regard to the easement that's for land that's dedicated, owned by town and dedicated to a public purpose, then it can be granted by a 2/3 vote of the legislature. Usually that's done, initiated by the town or with the town's approval. But if it's not, it can be done, initiated by a legislator or the governor. But apparently, based on at least preliminary research, it hasn't been done before. So that's kind of where things stand, and I think that information is pretty useful. The discussion apparent. So the siting board decision for the Commonwealth Wind Project has not started yet. It's at a much earlier state of development. Both the Vineyard Wind and the Park City Wind projects that already have siting board approval. So choices that a town has, and this is more of a strategic question, is you can oppose a project, but you're not likely to be able to negotiate a host community agreement. If you negotiate a host community agreement, you can generally get financial and other benefits, as well as sometimes additional mitigation measures that the siting board would not order and may not have the authority to order. But usually the quid pro quo in a host community agreement is a community will support or at least not oppose the project, which happened for the first two projects. So it's what I think was a good discussion. There's a trade-off. There are risks and benefits depending on your point of view in whether you take action to oppose a project or seek changes to it through the siting board process, or enter into a host community agreement and negotiate what benefits or mitigation measures you think are appropriate. And with regard to the first two wind projects in both cases, some of those mitigation measures, which specifically ones having to do with the substations and the design of it, were adopted by the siting board in their decision. The town has not formally taken a position on the Dowses Beach project. But there was a discussion that, you know, that they're ready to do so at some point in the future, although there's no great urgency to it, apparently. Probably a meeting, probably not the next one, but the one after, someone in the future, they'll address that. So that's a summary of what sort of major things that are going on with the offshore wind projects here. The last thing I think we talked about before was the turbine blade having broken up, and pieces of that have shown up in parts of Nantucket. I think even one of the beaches here. But you know, from what we know, it's apparently it's not toxic. The GE, who's the manufacturer, said that this was a manufacturing problem, which they're investigating. So ultimately, I mean, kind of big picture, they figure out the fix to it, and the project is likely to go forward. If it's still problematic, they may not be able to get the project financed. You know, the indication so far is it's something that appears to be. That's more information than you probably wanted on offshore wind.
It's interesting. Thank you.
So, so I think that's what we have. So we have a meeting, next meeting. Kelly, we hope by the time of the next meeting, everything is great with you.
Thank you.
And I mean, we can almost use the same agenda for the next meeting, except for the, you know, green communities kind of update with you know, what's happened with regard to the submission of comments by the town, and I can give a report on that.
Sounds good.
And I think as an objective for the next meeting, I would have reducing the percentage of the time that I talk in these meetings.
Hard. I mean, you're really spearheading that the green communities right now. So
Okay. So
a lot of information on there.
So I have a defense. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot of work, Barry, and I for one, I think all of us certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, it's you know, but I like learning new stuff. So.
Good. No, I think it's all good. So thank you.
Okay, yeah, and we'll see where it takes us. So, you know, thank you all, and we'll see you all next time, probably, except for Kelly.
Yeah. Do we have an official motion to close the meeting? I'm sorry.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Rob,
So,
thank you.
Thank you all.